During lunch with my in-laws, I received a message from an unknown number. Don't react. They are recording you. And that's how I discovered they were spying on me inside my own home. It was supposed to be just another Sunday with family. Small talk, plates on the table, forced smiles. But in the middle of lunch, a message arrived on my phone. Don't react. They are recording you. From that moment on, my life became a minefield. With my heart racing and without understanding what I was getting into, I discovered that something much bigger was happening, and it was coming from inside the house where I slept. What I discovered in the following days completely shook me. They were spying on me and I had no idea. But that was just the first layer of a truth that tried to silence me. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story and comment from which city you are reading. I want to know how far this truth can reach. The smell of roast in the oven mingled with the floral scent of my mother-in-law, who was animatedly talking about plans for the next weekend. Travis, my husband, smiled subtly, exchanging knowing glances with his father as they discussed soccer. Everything seemed perfectly fitted. The plates aligned, the embroidered tablecloths, the chairs occupied exactly as on previous Sundays. His family had this knack for turning any meal into a well-rehearsed act. I tried hard to appear part of that script, even without knowing my role. I picked up my wine glass and smiled at my mother-in-law, who was telling a childhood story about Travis, with an almost theatrical nostalgia. Everyone's laughter sounded too well-tuned, as if it had been practiced. The table was beautiful, the food was good, and no one raised their voice, but the atmosphere had something artificial about it, like a painting too beautiful to be real. I tried to relax, resting my hand on my lap, and discreetly glanced at my watch. The afternoon had barely begun, and I already wanted it to end. Travis nudged me lightly under the table, pointing with his chin to a platter of potatoes that my distracted mind had forgotten to pass on. I reacted with an apology, picking up the plate and smiling, feeling the heat on my face for being so absent-minded. Everyone chuckled lightly, as if it were a charming slip-up. I tried to concentrate, to dive into the conversation, to be friendly, to laugh at the right time. But inside, something in me couldn't settle down. The next moment, I felt a slight tremor in my pocket. I discreetly took out my phone, keeping it under the table. The lit screen displayed a notification that made my heart stop for a second. My phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number. I opened the message with a trembling thumb, without drawing attention. The content, short and direct, made my stomach churn. Don't react. They are recording you. For a moment, I completely lost the sound around me. Voices turned to noise, and my breathing became too silent. I looked around with forced naturalness, as if nothing had happened. My heart was beating so loudly that I feared someone might hear. The first thing that came to my mind was, is this a joke? But the seriousness of those words, the almost clinical tone, did not allow for that interpretation. There were no emojis, no typos, no trace of informality. It was a clear instruction, an order. And suddenly everything around me seemed to make sense differently, as if I had just woken up inside a theater where everyone was acting, except me. I smiled at Travis, who offered me more wine, and thanked him with a slight nod. I couldn't show anything. I couldn't even trust the person next to me. To whom did that message refer? Who was recording? And why? I discreetly looked around again, as if just admiring the old decor of the house, but every glance was now a potential threat. I held my phone tightly, as if it were the only anchor to reality at that moment. Everything inside me screamed to run, but something stronger told me I needed to understand before acting. I felt a chill down my spine but maintained my smile. I continued eating, but I couldn't taste anything anymore. My mind was divided between recent memories, trying to find any clue I might have ignored, and the faces in front of me. My mother-in-law smiled sweetly, but her eyes seemed colder than usual. Travis's father, always quiet, was asking too many questions today. And Travis, so comfortable, even seemed anxious for my reaction to everything. I observed the details of the room, looking for cameras or anything out of place. The new painting on the wall. The repositioned vase. The phone holder in the corner of the shelf that I didn't remember seeing before. Was that paranoia or perception? The problem was not knowing whom to trust, and that made me feel like a displaced piece in a game I didn't even know I was playing. I controlled the urge to go to the bathroom and check everything, but forced myself to stay there, present, feigning a tranquility I didn't feel. Every second was an eternity, every movement a performance. But I needed to understand if I was really the only one who didn't know what was happening. And what if all of this was a setup to destroy me? The seconds following lunch became a minefield. Every gesture, every glance, every silence carried a new uncomfortable weight. I watched my mother-in-law pour tea with such exaggerated delicacy that it almost seemed rehearsed. She talked about recipes, but her eyes scrutinized me with clinical attention. My father-in-law, in turn, kept his phone on the table, with the camera casually pointed at me. Or was it just my imagination? Travis talked about our last trip as if it were a memorized script, praising every detail, even those he had criticized at the time. I noticed his insistence on keeping the conversation focused on me. Tell them how you chose that hotel. Talk about the beach you loved. It was as if he wanted to make me talk all the time, to test reactions, to record speeches, to probe emotions. And all of this made me even more tense. I emotionally distanced myself like someone watching themselves from afar. While they laughed, I analyzed the timbre, the time between sentences, the crossed glances that seemed like secret signals. It was too subtle to accuse anyone, but intense enough to make me doubt everything. I couldn't trust even a blink. I had woken up in a world where everything was a performance, except my confusion. When my mother-in-law praised me for the dessert, which I hadn't even made, I realized how scripted everything was. The forced sweetness, the exact tone, the slight pause between the speech and the compliment. Something in my mother-in-law's eyes seemed rehearsed. I got up to help in the kitchen and deliberately dropped my phone, disguising the movement as an accident. Quickly, I activated voice recording before putting it in my apron pocket. I started smiling more often, laughing without genuine amusement, and commenting on trivialities while recording everything. My eyes went from one person's expression to another, cataloging snippets that might be useful later. I no longer trusted my memory, I needed proof. Voices filled the air with a trained naturalness. Even so, I caught a moment when my mother-in-law whispered something in Travis's ear and he just nodded, without responding. I couldn't hear the content, but I recorded the gesture. One of the paintings on the wall was slightly crooked, strange for someone as obsessed with organization as she was. It was the kind of detail that before I would ignore. Now it was a sign. I carried platters to the sink with choreographed lightness, keeping my phone strategically positioned. If anyone noticed, I would say it was to listen to music, but no one seemed to suspect. I wondered if they were sure I didn't know. And maybe they were right until an hour ago. But now every phrase, every pause, every glance became an element in my silent dossier. I continued recording until it was time to leave. I said goodbye with tight hugs and long smiles, pretending everything was normal. Every smile of mine hid a scream. Arriving home, I went straight to the bedroom. I slowly took off my shoes, as if expecting something to jump out of the dark. The atmosphere seemed the same, but there was a different energy there. I turned on my laptop to start reviewing the audios, and that's when I realized. Recent files, personal documents, drafts, photos, everything had been accessed that same day at 10 in the morning. I hadn't been home at that time. I opened the activity history. Some file names were duplicated with different extensions, as if someone had made quick and poorly done copies. The folder with my son's photos was marked as recently accessed. No one but me used that computer. The panic came silently like a cold breath on the back of my neck. This was not a coincidence. It was monitoring. The strangest thing was to note that, despite the accesses, no program seemed to have been visibly opened. As if whoever it was knew exactly what to look for, and how to leave no trace. It was a silent, intimate, and deeply strategic invasion. An attack disguised as routine, but one that left invisible scars. I started to tremble as I closed the laptop lid. The feeling of security inside my own home disappeared like a wisp of smoke. Someone had been in my room. The next morning, as I poured coffee into my cup, Travis watched me differently. His eyes lingered on me longer than usual, as if analyzing something invisible. When I asked if he had slept well, he gave a slight smile and asked if I had woken up again in the middle of the night, something that hadn't happened. I pretended not to notice the insinuation and continued stirring my sugar. He seemed to be gauging my reactions, as if everything I said would be noted somewhere. Throughout the day, the small provocations repeated. Subtle comments about my memory, about how distracted and forgetful I was. When I left the keys somewhere else, he laughed. "See, you need to rest, honey." But there was a strange tone in his voice, something between pity and strategy. I began to notice the pattern. Everything he said seemed intended to make me doubt myself. I still had no proof, but I felt the net closing in. One evening, as I tried to relax reading a book, he interrupted with an apparently innocent comment. "Honey, you've been so sensitive lately. Are you really okay?" I slowly closed the book, trying to suppress my discomfort. I said I was just tired from work. He nodded with a sure, but his eyes said something else, as if my answer had been wrong. As if there was a right answer and I no longer knew what it was. Everything started to feel like a test. And I no longer knew if he was my husband or my examiner. "Why have you been so paranoid lately?" On the weekend, I went to the market and met a longtime friend, Louisa. Her smile was cordial, but her gaze held something of concern. "I heard you had a breakdown these days. Is everything okay?" The question caught me off guard. I asked where she had heard that. She hesitated, then said she had heard it from someone close to the family. My blood ran cold. There had been no breakdown. Nothing but my attempt to appear normal amidst the invisible chaos. On Monday, my sister-in-law called me and between one topic and another commented, "You've always been so grounded, you know? It's strange to see you so emotional lately." The word emotional sounded like a disguised diagnosis. Gradually, I realized that something was being built behind my back. A version of me that didn't correspond to reality, but that was being spread brick by brick. And I didn't know how many people had already believed that version. During a lunch with coworkers, one of them made a joke about crazy moms. I laughed along but felt the weight of those words reverberate inside me. Had they also heard some story about me? I started to be quieter, avoid long conversations. Every sentence I said seemed like an opportunity for them to analyze me. I was being rewritten without my consent. Gradually, I became a caricature created by them. And the worst, without any chance of defense. "I didn't think you were the type to lose control." One day, I opened my personal email account and found an automatic calendar reminder. Appointment with Dr. Americo Psychiatry, 2 p.m. I thought it was a mistake, but when I called the office, the secretary confirmed the appointment booked in my name. I had never heard of that doctor. I asked who had made the appointment. She replied that it was Mr. Travis, claiming that I needed support for recent crises. My heart raced. I went to the computer's browsing history and found searches for psychiatric clinics and treatments for emotional disorders. All made from Travis's account. And all recent. He hadn't said anything to me. He was planning this in silence, creating an alternative mental health history, a sick, fragile, unstable version of me. And now he had booked an appointment, as if there was already a diagnosis ready, just waiting for a signature. I sat on the bed with my hands in my lap, feeling the ground disappear beneath my feet. I realized that it wasn't just about recordings or messages. It was something deeper, more dangerous. A meticulous construction to nullify me, to discredit me, to, at the right moment, completely erase me as a mother, as a woman, as a lucid person. And the worst, he wasn't alone. They were preparing me for a public collapse that I never provoked. They were setting me up to look crazy. It was on a Monday morning that I decided to stop waiting for the next blow. I discreetly researched digital security experts and found a name with good references. Caio Neurona, specializing in domestic espionage tracking. I sent a simple, direct message and asked for total discretion. Within hours, he responded with a time for an in-person meeting. I made up an excuse to leave the house and went to the small office hidden in a commercial gallery in the city center. I spoke little. I showed him the message I received, told him about the accesses on the laptop, and mentioned the doctor's appointment made without my knowledge. Caio listened in silence, taking notes. "Let's start with your house," he said. With a discreet bag and professional demeanor, he scheduled a visit for the next day, when Travis would be at work. I went home with my heart pounding, as if I was finally taking control of my destiny. On the agreed day, he went through each room with a signal detector and equipment designed to capture irregular transmissions. He went through the living room, my son's bedroom, the suite, and then stopped. He asked me to come closer and showed me the display of a portable device. There was interference. He climbed onto a chair and removed a small object from the top of the shelf, behind a decorative vase. It was a micro camera. The same happened in the kitchen and my office. You have hidden cameras in 3 rooms of the house. Kaio took the equipment for analysis and returned 2 days later with the results. His report stated that spyware was installed on both my laptop and my cell phone. The program allows real-time capture of everything. Texts, photos, audios, even GPS movement, he explained. He showed me how the spyware operated silently, without generating notifications. I would never have noticed. I felt violated from the inside out. He asked if I had noticed strange behaviors, such as messages that seemed to know too much or anticipated reactions from close people. The answer was yes. The repeated conversations, the strategic questions, the coordinated glances. I had been a monitored puppet, and every step I took fed the narrative built against me. They know everything you write, they even talk about the tone of your voice in audio messages, he said. My body trembled as I held the report. Seeing it printed, validated by a professional, made everything more real. The paranoia that made me doubt myself was now there, explained by technical data. Kaio recommended that I replace all devices, but first, he suggested that we keep everything quiet to track the origin of the surveillance. I agreed. We needed to know how far they went. Little by little, the pain turned into strategy. There was no point in suffering in silence anymore. Everything you write, they receive in real time. With the data in hand, Kaio began a deeper tracking of the networks used by the cameras and the IP of the devices connected to the spyware. I waited for days, trying to appear the same as always at home, swallowing every fake smile Travis threw at me. The expert called me on a rainy afternoon. Dakota, we managed to track the server where all this is being stored. My heart raced. The answer I so feared was about to come out of his mouth. I took a deep breath before asking where it came from. He hesitated, then said, "Your in-laws' house." Silence. For a few seconds I couldn't react. I expected it to be Travis, maybe someone hired, but I never imagined that the heart of this surveillance was in that house that served me apple pies and false smiles. The house where I sat on Sundays to listen to childhood stories and future plans. The cameras were just the tip of the iceberg. The connection came directly from their home router. It was from there that the commands came, from there that every detail of my life was monitored. The family that claimed to welcome me as a daughter was the same one that traced my steps with the coldness of a hunter. Kaio looked at me with contained compassion. They weren't just watching you. They were building something. I felt a knot form in my throat. Part of me wanted to run, another part wanted to destroy everything. But what I did was just stare into space and whisper, "My own family is destroying me from within." The subpoena arrived like a silent stab in the middle of routine. A brown envelope, with an official seal and harsh words printed in cold font. Travis had filed a lawsuit to obtain sole custody of our son. He alleged emotional instability, paranoid behavior, and a harmful home environment. I read each line with trembling hands, my face burning as if I were being publicly exposed. That was it. That was why. All the manipulation, the recordings, the rehearsed smiles, all to build a narrative in which I was the incapable mother, the unbalanced woman. He was ready to hand my heart to justice as proof of my ruin. And worse, his arguments seemed to have been prepared with millimeter precision, like someone setting a trap months in advance. I took a deep breath and closed the envelope. Travis came home that night acting as if nothing had happened. He kissed my face, asked about dinner, smiled when he saw our son on the couch. I wanted to scream, to throw the papers in his face, but I held back. That battle could not be emotional, it had to be strategic. It wouldn't be me who lost control. Not this time. The blow had been dealt, and he thought I would fall apart. As I set the table for dinner, his words echoed in my mind. She is not psychologically capable of raising a child. That same week, I searched the old computer Travis used before his current one. He had left it in the house's storage room, forgetting that not everything can be erased. With Kaio's help, I recovered old files, histories, and messages. It was in one of the archived emails that I found the cruelest piece of the entire staging. The title was Planned Stages. The sender? His mother. And the content, a conversation between the three: Travis, his mother, and his father. There it was in cold words. She needs to appear unstable in everyone's eyes. The slightest reaction out of tune we use against her. Travis had replied. I'll pressure her little by little, without her realizing it. If she breaks down in public, it will be easier. My hands sweated. I read and reread the email like someone facing an emotional death sentence. It wasn't paranoia. It never was. It was all real. Meticulous. Cruel. There were dates, stages, strategies. Even the suggestion to plant rumors among friends and schedule the psychiatric appointment was already in the plan. They discussed my life like a chessboard, moving pieces while I slept next to an enemy. It hurt to know that it came from within the family. But something stronger was being born within me. Indignation. And this time it wouldn't make me tremble, it would make me act. I closed the laptop with a plan. Their game was all there, documented. They want to provoke me until I break down in public. I gathered all the evidence in folders labeled with dates, sources, and screenshots. Audios, photos of the cameras found, Kayo's report, prints of notebook accesses, emails. Every detail that once made me doubt myself was now a weapon in my favor. I no longer had time to feel fear. I had a war to face, and I needed an ally of equal caliber. That's when I found the name of Laura Montalveo, a lawyer specializing in cybercrime and psychological violence. I scheduled a meeting for the next day and was received by her with firmness and empathy. After finishing telling everything, she looked at me with a calm but accurate gaze. Dakota, what they did to you is not just unjust. It's criminal. For the first time, someone validated my pain without doubting my sanity. I left all the evidence with her. And I left that office more uplifted than when I entered. I went home without crying. I passed Travis without saying a word. He still thought he was winning. But he hardly knew that the tables had turned. Because now I was no longer alone. Now I knew exactly who I was and what they were trying to erase. No matter how long it lasted, I would go all the way. I won't wait for the next blow anymore. Now it's my turn. Laura was clear from our first meeting. Now every word and every gesture of yours must be calculated. She guided me to maintain my routine as if nothing were happening. To smile, talk, go out with Travis and act normally, while recording, taking notes and documenting everything. The new strategy required coldness. If before I was the target, now I needed to be the spy within my own life. She taught me how to use an app disguised as a calendar that automatically recorded audios. She also installed an encrypted backup system to save files without leaving traces on the computer. Every conversation with Travis, every exchange of messages with my in-laws, every casual comment became data. For the first time, I began to have control over the narrative they tried to build without me. And that changed everything. My eyes learned to see what was once invisible. The calculated silences, the studied pauses, the knowing glances between them. I started to respond with short, unemotional phrases, avoiding conflict. The acting was exhausting but necessary. Laura repeated. They expect your fall. Give them your coldness. And that's how I went from silent victim to invisible strategist. As the days passed and I recorded everything, I understood the value of control. Now you will become the observer. It was one common late afternoon that I received a message from an unknown profile on Instagram. The name meant nothing to me, but the profile picture showed a familiar face. The message read, "We need to talk. I know what he's doing to you." My heart pounded. The woman's name was Isadora, and after a few quick exchanges, she told me she had dated Travis years ago. What she had to say took my breath away. I scheduled a video call, and on the other side of the screen, I saw in her eyes the same fear I now recognized in my reflection. She recounted how Travis manipulated her, alienated her from her family, and how in the end he tried to convince her that she was unstable. The tactics were almost identical. The isolation, the provocations, the emotional traps. It was a pattern, not an isolated case. And Isadora was not the only one. Other women had also gone through this, and she was willing to provide their contacts. She said she kept old messages, threatening audios, and even conversations with friends where he boasted about controlling his girlfriends. She had been silent for years. But now, knowing what I was facing, she decided to speak up. This was no longer just about me. It was a history of meticulous and repeated abuse. For the first time, I wasn't the only voice telling the truth. He did this to me too. And to others. With Lara's support and Isadora's testimonies, I began to assemble a complete dossier. I organized the prints in folders with dates, cross-referenced location records with sent messages, inserted recordings with captions, and attached the technical report on the hidden cameras. It was like reassembling a perverse puzzle where, piece by piece, the image of manipulation was revealed. And now I had the whole picture. Every sleepless night, every restrained tear, was now transformed into a document. I was no longer reacting to the attack, I was anticipating it. The dossier was not just for justice but also for me. To remind myself that it wasn't imagination, it wasn't exaggeration. It was real. And I survived. But it wasn't time to show my cards yet. Lara reviewed every detail rigorously. She wanted the material to be irrefutable. When we expose them, they won't be able to deny it. I was ready for the moment when silence would turn into proof and pain would turn into evidence. It was only a matter of time. And when it came, there would be no turning back. I have the evidence. Just waiting for the right moment. On that Friday, the house was arranged with a care that disguised larger intentions. I invited coworkers, mutual friends, family, including my in-laws and, of course, Travis. The reason? An informal dinner, a reunion of affection, a celebration of family affection. The table was set with candles, soft music in the background, carefully chosen dishes. I walked among the guests with a rehearsed smile, not letting on what was to come. Travis appeared comfortable, greeting everyone with his usual calculated friendliness. My in-laws also arrived with gifts, distributing hugs and sweet comments. I observed everything unhurriedly, like someone watching a movie already knowing the ending. The guests chatted, toasted, laughed. But I knew that night, silence would have more power than any word. After dinner, I asked everyone to gather in the living room. I said I would like to share something important, as a way of thanking them for being present. I picked up the TV remote and took a deep breath. The time had come. Every movement of mine had been precisely planned, and I was no longer afraid. Some faces were already showing discomfort. The first image that appeared on the screen was an audio recording, followed by screenshots of messages exchanged between Travis and his parents. Then the image of one of the microcameras being removed from the shelf. The videos were clear. The statements unquestionable. The voices unmistakable. The dates and times were there, explicit. I showed the technical report, the emails, and finally the history of espionage. No one moved. The sound of heavy breathing filled the room. Some averted their gaze. Others seemed paralyzed. The accusations that once only lived within me were now projected for all to see. It was impossible to deny. I did not cry. I did not scream. I just let the facts speak for themselves. My eyes met Travis's. He seemed motionless, as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. His in-laws tried to maintain their composure, but their faces were disfigured by a mixture of shock and despair. Nothing they expected was happening. I had not crumbled. I had prepared myself. The room fell into a deathly silence. It was then that Travis stood up. He tried to laugh, attempting to bring lightness to what he called an equivocated interpretation. He said that everything had been taken out of context, that the videos were old, that I was emotionally unstable. He claimed that I had manipulated the files, that I was obsessed with conspiracy theories. Some guests looked at me uncertain, waiting for my reaction, but I already knew he would do that. I opened the last folder on the computer connected to the TV. In it, the testimonies of Isadora and other women. Names, dates, screenshots of conversations, records of old occurrences. The stories repeated with frightening details. Each one drew a pattern of abuse, manipulation, and attempted silencing. It was no longer about me, it was about all of us. Travis paled. With a firm voice, I looked at each person in the room and said, "For months I was treated like I was crazy. But what is here is the truth they wanted to erase." The looks that once judged me now turned against him. And in the center of the silence, finally I felt seen. For the first time, it wasn't my word against his. It was reality against the mask. Who's unstable now, Travis? On the Monday following the exposition, Lara and I entered the courthouse with the evidence organized in 3 physical folders and an encrypted USB drive. The case was formalized for psychological violence, digital stalking, invasion of privacy, and manipulation with the intent of parental alienation. The prosecution received the material with unusual attention, interrupting the reading to confirm dates and names. The duty judge scheduled an urgent preliminary hearing. For the first time, I was not seen as the emotional party, but as the victim. Laura did an impeccable job. Her speeches were firm, objective, but charged with a sharp sense of justice. She showed the audios, the screenshots of the messages, the camera report, and the testimonies of the other victims. Travis was subpoenaed to respond in record time. Even so, he tried to discredit everything, alleging fabrication and setup. But there was no longer room for rhetoric. The documentation spoke for itself. In the courthouse corridors, I crossed paths with him. I tried not to avert my eyes, but I felt a chill down my spine. Travis still tried to maintain the image of an wronged husband, but the mask no longer fooled the eyes of those around him. I confronted him with silence. And when I walked out the main door, I felt the weight of fear slowly begin to lift from my shoulders. It wasn't relief yet, but it was the beginning. This evidence is more than enough. At the hearing, Laura requested an immediate protective order, alleging psychological risk and indirect threat to my son's emotional integrity. The judge heard both sides but did not take long to issue his opinion. Travis was to maintain a minimum distance of 300 meters and was prohibited from any contact, including through third parties. Furthermore, provisional custody of our son was immediately suspended. I heard the decision with a lump in my throat. The first step had been taken. Travis had not expected that. His lawyer mumbled requests for review, but it was in vain. The decision was signed and sealed. The judge was clear. The evidence indicates an attempt at serious manipulation for the purpose of emotional destabilization. The room seemed frozen, and for a moment, even the air was too thick to breathe. I looked at Travis. He looked away. For the first time, he didn't have a ready answer. From that moment on, my son would be protected. And so would I. Not just from his actions but from the doubt that for so long eroded my perception of reality. I left the courthouse with Laura by my side, and when we stepped onto the sidewalk she told me, "This is just the beginning. Now it's time to rebuild." I agreed in silence, feeling that a part of me was beginning to be reborn. And this time based on facts, not on fear. I had faced the monster without having to become one. His face went pale. In the following days, I organized with Laura the formal request for sole custody. This time I was supported by psychological reports, digital evidence, records of emotional abuse, and the support of witnesses who had previously remained silent. The document was filed with all annexes. The Child Advocacy Office was called to evaluate the environment and the history of cohabitation. I opened my home, my life, and my heart, without fear of judgment. I received a visit from a social worker and, with serenity, showed her my son's routine. The school also sent a letter reporting his healthy behavior and the loving environment at home. My effort was not to win a battle. It was to ensure that he grew up in peace. I wanted more than justice on paper. I wanted emotional security for both of us. While waiting for the new hearing, I maintained the routine with my son. We played, read together, he laughed freely. I observed every gesture with gratitude. Even with the scars still open, I still felt fear, but I was no longer its hostage. Now fear was a memory, and not a prison. I don't want revenge. I want peace. Justice had recognized my suffering, halted the abuses, and given me a chance to start over. But deep down, it was still hard to breathe without feeling that something could happen at any moment. Nights were long, and the noises in the house became echoes of past surveillance. Sleeping with the lights off was a challenge, and locking the doors became an almost religious ritual. I was winning on the outside, but inside I was still fighting ghosts. Even with my son safe and life trying to return to normal, crises came in silent waves. A sound in the hallway, a notification on my phone, a random memory. Everything could paralyze me for minutes. I learned to recognize the signs. Accelerated breathing, tightness in my chest, trembling hands. I knew it wasn't weakness. It was trauma. A residue of the control that had been exerted over me for so long. Therapy became part of my routine. Talking about what I had experienced helped me to name the pain and, little by little, regain control of the narrative. But there were still days when I questioned whether all of it had really happened. It was hard to accept that someone who slept by my side had orchestrated my ruin. And even winning on paper, the battle within me continued, solitary, silent, and continuous. Fear still lingered in the corners of the house. The attempts at contact came weeks later. First, mutual friends asking if everything was okay, with glances loaded with ulterior motives. Then, vague messages from old colleagues of Travis, insinuating that I had been too harsh. Then came the blow. A close friend showed me screenshots of a conversation where Travis said I was having new crises, and that I might need urgent help. The narrative returned subtle, sneaky. It was as if he was still trying to destabilize me even from a distance. The words were carefully chosen, as if he wanted to appear concerned, not manipulative. But I already knew that tactic. He planted doubts in the people around me, hoping someone would bring it to me. And when they did, he would distance himself from the blame with phrases like, "I'm just worried." It was old, but it still hurt. I realized that, even with justice on my side, he would try to find ways to hurt me. He couldn't do it directly, so he used social loopholes, old ties, others' doubts. And this made me understand that the fight was not just for my protection. It was for my reputation, for my story. I could no longer allow him to write chapters of my life for me. They still want to destroy me. I decided it was time to change the game again. I picked up my phone, sat in my room and pressed record. I looked at the camera as if looking into a mirror. No makeup, no script, no fear. I told my story. From the first lunch, the message, the cameras, the manipulations, the justice, and most importantly, the silent pains. I spoke of the crises, the sleepless nights, the fear disguised as routine. I spoke as a woman, as a mother, as a survivor. The video lasted a little over 10 minutes. I only edited it to include dates and images that proved each statement. Nothing sensationalist. Just the truth, raw and direct. I published it on social media with a racing heart, but firm conviction. Not to expose myself, but to prevent others from continuing to be deceived by him. His silence had always been his best weapon. Now I took that away from him. The views climbed in a few hours. Comments of support, similar stories, requests for help. But the most important thing was to feel that my voice, once muffled, now echoed in thousands of others. I was no longer an isolated woman trying to prove her sanity. I was a woman who survived and decided to tell. Because what they tried to take from me, I recovered with courage, my truth. Now everyone knows what they tried to do to me. In the days that followed the video's publication, my phone didn't stop vibrating. First, there were private messages, then public comments and emails from strangers. Women of different ages, cities, and stories, saying they had gone through similar situations. Some had never told anyone. Others said that, for the first time, they felt the courage to speak. Pain when shared built bridges. The video was replicated by support profiles, legal pages, and influencers who addressed topics of mental health and women's rights. In a few days, it had already surpassed 500,000 views. But more important than the numbers were the faces behind the stories. Women who finally saw themselves, heard themselves, recognized themselves. This was no longer an isolated complaint. It was a movement. I began to respond as much as I could, listening to each account with the same care I wished they had shown me. Each story was a wound, but also a confirmation that I was never alone. Travis was no exception. He was the portrait of a structure that fed on others' silence. But now voices were uniting. And I knew. There was no turning back. It wasn't just about me. It was about all of us. Driven by the stories, I sat down with Laura and designed something bigger than a response. I created an emotional and legal support project for women who had suffered espionage, manipulation, and psychological violence. I named it Invisible Voice, because that's what we were before we broke the silence. With the help of volunteer professionals, we set up a network of free and confidential services. Each step was built with the weight of my own experience. We launched an online platform, with space for anonymous complaints, scheduling of support, and access to informative content. In a few days, the first consultations began. Psychologists, lawyers, social workers, all there for something greater. The project grew not by strategy but by necessity. It was a collective response to what so many of us endured alone. For the first time, my pain made sense. I started giving interviews, participating in debates, and writing articles. Speaking no longer hurt me, It strengthened me. Every word released into the world was a crack in the wall of silence. And the more that wall crumbled, the more women passed through it, finding each other. It was a new cycle, a new life. And I was a part of it, not as a victim but as a bridge. My pain became a path to help. Months later, I received notification of the final court hearing. The tribunal, after analyzing all the reports, testimonies, and evidence, granted me definitive custody and placed legal restrictions on Travis. The decision included a prohibition from approaching me, contacting me, and any public exposure that could defame me or harm my image. The judge concluded the case with a phrase I will never forget. "You resisted the attempt at erasure with courage and truth." Travis did not appear at the hearing. His lawyer merely submitted a formal notice of withdrawal of any appeal. His silence now was irrelevant. There was no longer any threat, any doubt, any attempt at manipulation that could affect me. Justice this time not only heard me, it protected me. And that, to me, was more than a legal victory. It was the reclaiming of who I was. When I left the courthouse, the sky was clear. I picked up my son from school and we went for ice cream. He didn't understand everything, but he knew something had changed. I knew too. For the first time in a long time, I smiled without fear. And as I lay down that night, I realized that the silence of the house was no longer frightening. It was peace. This time I came out whole. Now, I'm curious about you who heard my story. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Have you experienced anything similar? Support the channel, subscribe, like, comment, and share this video. I'm leaving another story you'll also enjoy on the end screen, and it will definitely surprise you. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.